introduction. I was very touched by that. Really, among the many introductions I've received, I really rate that right up the top. So it's really my great delight to be here. And I know it's customary to say that when one begins speaking, but some of you may know that I actually wear a couple of different hats. So in addition to being the co-founder and the executive director of the Conscious Capitalism Institute, something that I'll be telling you about today, I'm also, I've been involved in the sourcing and advisory business, and also as an entrepreneur with a number of sourcing engagements for a number of years. And perhaps a third hat, when I do have the time, is I'm a professor of business at Boston College. And what I wanted to really say that all three of my hats and heads are nodding in excitement because really this is a subject that's very, very close to my heart, both from a conceptual standpoint and from business. So when I think of sustainable sourcing, I like to submit that this is not only the right thing to do. We saw these very touching videos and wonderful companies behind them, but it's also the smart thing to do. It's increasingly going to become, if it hasn't already, the high performance way to go. And that may seem contradictory today, but it's very much underway. Most recently, and we'll be all pleased to hear, those of you who are really supporting this, is that this idea of communities involved in sourcing, communities involved in all aspects of a business, received support from a very powerful, in quotes, mainstream voice. In the most recent edition of the Harvard Business Review, Michael Porter, the dean of global strategy in many ways, has come out with a wonderful argument for shared value creation at the community level. And again, the point is, and he very explicitly doesn't take a sentimental or a social view even. He takes a very hardline business view, saying that this is the path to greater value creation. So why is that so? I think to recognize that, we need to also look at conscious capitalism. This is a movement that has grown really since the last 2 years. It got its genesis a little earlier, but it's been 3 years or so in the making. And I'm delighted to report that I've been making appearances and speeches literally around the world the last couple of years. And it's truly heartening to get that sort of warm response across the board, across sectors. So let me work through some slides, and hopefully this will work. Okay, well, there we are. We're very proud of our logo, by the way. That was gifted to us by a very high-end agency. I'm told it costs many, many thousands of dollars. We were the lucky beneficiaries of that logo, so I hope you like it. It's the first time it's being aired to the world. I like this metaphor of the caterpillar turning into a butterfly. It reflects the inherent potential that we all have to dramatically change ourselves. In fact, it even undergoes a tremendous change in its DNA. I mean, it's a fascinating scientific process, but it's also something that reflects what companies can do, what business can do. So I have, of course, violated a number of canons. I have a lot of slides, so I'm going to slip through them quickly. But this is, in fact, a wonderful succinct quote by Tom Friedman that summarizes where we are really, that the model we have created in the last 50 years is simply unsustainable economically and ecologically. We know that. And I love that line, both Mother Nature and Father Greed hit the wall at the same time. And in some senses, that's what we're, having to cope with. So what have we done? I mean, and I assume the people in the room are somewhat familiar with this, but 75% of our forests are gone, 30% of our arable land, large mammals are down by 90%, large fish are down by 95%, half of all species may well disappear, the toxic burden in humans is rising, oil supplies are decreasing, and these are interesting statistics, and this is from Paul Hawken and the Earth Institute. institute, and one could cavil at some of the numbers, but the general thrust of them is very powerful. That if we simply continue at this level, we're going to deplete Earth in a very, very cognizable way. And as I said, if we all lived as Americans, we'd need 5 times the resources that Earth can supply. And that's, of course, the aspiration that's spreading around the world. So something has to be reconciled. In this backdrop, we see the mistrust in business is at an all-time low, all-time high, or mistrust is at an all-time low, and it should worry us who, those of you who are concerned about Congress, that business is just, you know, even lower now than Congress, according to a recent Gallup poll. That should give us pause right away. But the key is that such cynicism and distrust have very many high social costs. So why has this happened? Again, it's just that people have evolved. Our consciousness as a race continues to evolve, but businesses haven't kept up. Where are we changing? This is something I normally spend a fair amount of time on, so I want to apologize for rushing through. But we've identified 1990 as some kind of a watershed change, and some people actually are calling this sort of new age of transcendence. It, of course, coincided with the fall of the Berlin Wall, the seeming victory of capitalism over socialism, and socialism really didn't fail the people. It failed economically, and in that sense failed the people. But nevertheless, there's many dimensions of capitalism that we saw also needed to change. But the biggest, probably the single biggest effect has been the internet and what it has done. It's raised the education level, and the fact that we are aging as a population across the world. In the US, our median age crossed 40 sometime in the last decade. And as you know, when we get older, we do get more sensitive. We get more aware. We're more willing to listen. Interestingly enough, many of the studies recently show that the feminine dimensions of leadership are the dimensions that are emerging. Harvard and McKinsey have just come out with a balanced, what they're calling the balanced approach to leadership, which is culled really from women leaders. So overall, there is an increasing consciousness, and that too is spurring some of the demands for changes in business. So what does higher consciousness really mean? Ultimately, it means that we need to appreciate the laws of nature that enable us to function harmoniously, and that we see reality as it truly is. We don't delude ourselves. We see a lot of delusion when it comes to the way and the rate at which we're depleting resources, and that's one of the areas where we truly need a reality check. So bottom line is that we have to learn somehow to balance action with non-action. So moving right along, are there companies that exemplify a more conscious way of being? And I use one example, though we have actually a whole host of such companies that we've identified over the last 3 years. We've tracked them since 1994. And these two numbers perhaps tell us a lot. And I might imagine that this could be an unusual number for you. The 122% refers to the S&P 500 and its growth from 1994 to 2004. And that was a decent rate, about 11 or 12% a year. And by the way, we've continued that study since that time. 1,111 refers to the growth of so-called conscious companies, or companies that are practicing conscious capitalism. They were outperforming the market at a 9-to-1 clip over a decade. And this is over boom cycles, bust cycles. So it was an unusual result. We picked the companies not because of their humanistic characteristics, though they all had that, but we picked them for really other reasons that I'll just detail later. But let me tell you a little bit about Whole Foods as an example. This is a company that grew as 2 college dropouts, literally creating a natural food store in Austin. Today, it's a $11 billion company. That's a non-trivial rate of growth. They've actually returned to their investors, and that's very important. They've returned an average 27% cumulative aggregated growth rates over the last 30 years, uninterrupted. So, as I said, there's more to goodness than just simply being good and nice. It's actually a high-performance approach to business. And let me tell you a few things that characterize Whole Foods that make it different, and many of the conscious companies that we've identified are different. This number, unfortunately I didn't bring my pointer, this number that you see, 93%. 93% is the distribution of stock ownership within the company. Just so we know, in most Fortune 500 countries, 75% of the stock options are held by 5 people, the top 5. So that's a fairly radical departure. 19 to 1 is another very interesting statistic. That's the ratio between the average worker in the corporation and the CEO. What would you guess is the typical ratio in, say, the Fortune 1000? Any brave soul? 400.
527.
Yeah, it's somewhere between 4 and 500. I believe it's 450 to 1. So at a 19 to 1, that's almost, perhaps radically small ratio. John Mackey, the CEO, in fact, 2 years ago, decided he'd made more than enough money. And he voluntarily cut down his salary to $1 into the foreseeable future. He still receives options and so on, and most of which he gives to the Whole Planet Foundation, because his point was that I've made more than enough money that I can possibly spend over my remaining years. There are a number of great stories within Whole Foods. Another time I'll tell you. Even animal compassion standards, I think, is worth, that's a woo-woo, touchy-feely type of idea. Perhaps many people, look down on the notion. Whole Foods is to make a great margin selling lobsters. In a particular way, the way we've always seen them. They're in the tanks, their claws are in rubber bands, until some animal rights activist, to Mackey's annoyance, kept pursuing him, saying, you're not doing the right thing. Eventually he engaged with them, and he understood, yes, that they were being, in quotes, cruel to these lobsters. They went so far as to adopt a sentient being standard. And now lobsters are sold differently, in a different way. And again, would you think that that had an impact on their bottom line? No. If anything, it helped. So it's not something they did in a calculated way. It's something that when they did things the right way, the world turned back and rewarded them. And that's an underlying theme. There's been a tremendous underlying change in the relationship of society to business. That's what social media and the internet have wrought. So there's all kinds of wonderful examples in these companies. So that becomes a very unusual question, really. Can you build businesses based on love? When John, to keep with the Whole Foods example, when he wrote that letter, cutting himself down to $1, he actually signed his letter saying, "Much love, John," to his entire staff. It'd be interesting to think of how many CEOs in that same position would actually use the word love. So, but we've built our edifice on an empire of fear and greed. If you really look at the underlying policies, they're all based on fear of performance and incentives to perform. Is that the way? Dan Pink has a very interesting book called Drive, and he talks about drive, and he talks about the differences between extrinsic motivation, which are things like external rewards, and intrinsic motivation. And you might imagine that intrinsic motivation tends to triumph over long periods of time. We used to joke about this. What kind of a work culture is it giving us when we are saying, thank God it's Friday, we can't wait to get out of town or get out of our office and enjoy our weekend when we can be truly real? Gary Hamel, who's one of our great management theorists, says the challenge of our times today is to build companies as human as the people who work in them. Our model, the industrial model, historically has been to dehumanize people. We buy your time, we buy your expertise, we don't really care about who you actually are. Today it's all about unleashing the talent, unleashing the passion, unleashing the creativity. Those are gifts that people give. Those are things that you can't buy. As a firm, you have to earn those gifts. That's a model that people are starting to realize. As I said, now it's filtered all the way to the Porters of the world and to the Harvard Business Review. As I said, even here Starbucks has that option. I hate my job. A lot of people do. heart attacks go up on Monday morning. I actually heard the Dalai Lama say this at a panel I was on, and I was surprised. And it turned out that he was right. Heart attacks go up. So hopefully we'll get companies based on love, and we'll say, thank God it's Monday. So all of this was given a genesis by this book, Firms of Endearment. This underlies our research at the Conscious Capital Institute. It identified a number of world-class firms that were outperforming the market. And these are some of the familiar names. And what's interesting is, again, that we picked these companies on their humanistic profiles, and only then did we examine their financial performance. As I mentioned, the Firms of Endearment were beating the S&P 500 by 102%, by 1,011 to 122. But what's equally compelling is the GTG. That stands for Good to Great. You heard the book Good to Great by Jim Collins. That's one of the best-selling business books of all time. And those were picked purely for their financial performance. These companies in the sample outperformed the good to great companies over a 10-year period. So very compelling evidence that these models pay and that great businesses now look different. They look at total value created on a sustained basis that values in an equitable and enlightened manner distributes those values across its shareholders. And they enhance the overall health of business and society. And that's what sustainability is all about. Their very existence enriches the world. So again, fairly quickly, our businesses create many different kinds of wealth. We have only been focused on one kind. And again, this broader understanding of wealth actually allows us to redo the equation by which we assess businesses. So that's really the idea, the conscious view of the business. It's not intersecting circles. The business is part of society, and that in turn is part of the planet. And of course, we're custodians for both society and the planet. So consciousness and business. So to be conscious is to be awake, to be mindful, and to be cognizant of the long-term impact of your decisions. And that's really underlies these core precepts of conscious capitalism. In a nutshell, we talk about firms driven by a higher purpose, not just profits. We talk about not just shareholder primacy, but a stakeholder model. We talk about conscious leaders who are not into command and control, but are coaches, they're motivators. And we talk about a conscious culture, which is characterized by an acronym we call TACTILE, which is trust, authenticity, caring, transparency, integrity, leadership, and empowerment. So purpose is obviously, in many ways, the driving motive for these firms, and we see that in society overall. And we've moved from sort of profit maximization to purpose maximization. Go time check here. Okay. So again, we're talking really about purpose-driven firms, and the firms that you saw featured in the videos were really ultimately driven by that purpose, but it's that purpose that has led them to profitability. This is a wonderful book that I would recommend. Roy Spence runs a billion-dollar agency in Texas. It's not what you sell, it's what you stand for. And as they have the Purpose Institute, and one of their consistent results is that purpose-driven firms always end up being more profitable than the founders ever conceived possible. So I'll leave you with some examples. Southwest Airlines, Whole Foods. When Southwest started, only 15% of the people had flown. Today, it's the only profitable airline over the last 30 years. Is that a coincidence? REI, even Harvard Business School. It's very interesting, this quote. Teaching people how to make a decent profit decently. This is how the first dean of Harvard in the 1600s actually came up with a purpose. And Nitin Noria, the new dean, has actually, interestingly, brought that back because they feel responsible. They've been felt blamed. This book by Viktor Frankl is something that I really would strongly recommend. And I think the key thing to understand that happiness, even though our Constitution says so, cannot be pursued. It ensues as a result of living a life of meaning and purpose. So I'm going to just end with one slide which talks about the stakeholder model. We have lots of opportunities here. Again, from an overcrowded planet to stuffing our customers. We're doing a session on conscious marketing, how society has moved from fulfilling needs in marketing to fulfilling desires, whether they're good for you or not. And is that actually a sustainable long-term policy? We think not. So then, again, as I said, number of great examples. I'm going to end with the characteristics of conscious leaders who are exemplified by the awardees today, by the applicants for the awards, by the people who started them. So Wanda, Karen, the whole GSC, we really commend you for your brave move in this direction. As I said, you've unwittingly or perhaps knowingly redefined mainstream. That is my submission today, and when we revisit this in some years from now, I hope you'll be saying, yes, he told us so. That is indeed the case. So thank you very much. We'll take some questions. I want to put up one slide that we can look at. For those of you who are wondering, why does conscious capitalism work? And these are the real business reasons. These firms have lower gross margins, but higher net margins. Think about that. That means they have more productive employees. They have more engaged people. That more than makes up for paying them above the average or training them more. Their costs of marketing are radically lower. They spend as much as 10% compared to, they're 90% lower than their competitors. They have lower costs all along the way because of their heightened community engagement. And that's the message of conscious sourcing. So, any questions? I understand there's some mics wandering around.
Question. Really enjoyed your presentation. I would like to know, in your judgment, what you feel of companies today would be a representative of one or two that represents a significant transformation from may have been a company that would have been led less enlightened and now moving towards the more sustainable area that you've observed and would be a good story of leadership.
Okay, actually I can think of multiple examples, and one may surprise you. It's GE. When you talked about the GE Eco-Imagination product, today the sales from that line alone have crossed $20 billion. They are seeing that as a source of the future. The same GE had a very checkered record when it came to water pollution and industrial effluence 30 years ago. And it's not just GE's own fault. Our social constructs were really not in place to judge them in the same way. So you could certainly see that as a very prominent example that the language within the firm has changed under Jeff Immelt. Jack Welch too is fully recognizing, again, we can't be prescient before our times. GE has been a model that we've studied and admired for years, and we continue to admire them. They're one of the most admired companies on the planet, but certainly that's one. Eaton Industries, another $72 billion today. Tremendous gains from their eco-power offerings. There are a variety of those companies, and we saw a lot of Indian companies. The Indian company HCL is a great transformation in progress. Procter & Gamble under Alan Lafley has also put purpose, values, and principles far ahead, far more prominently. So we actually find change in almost every major company. It's really a question of degree. Pepsi under Indra Nooyi has made amazing commitments. They're still selling sugared water to a large number of people on the planet, but they're aware. They're aware, they're truly trying to change it.
Thank you.
The presentation was really great. I just had a question. One of your slides where you said they select the companies based on the humanistic traits. Can you just go into that a little bit of what was the selection
Yeah,
criteria for that?
the Firms of Endearment, by the way, has become a bestseller around the world. A sleeper bestseller has now been translated into 14 languages. The original project was really geared at excellence in marketing. They were looking at firms, 300 firms that seemed to have extraordinarily effective marketing, that they spent a lot less than their competitors and yet achieved very high customer satisfaction rating, very high unaided recall for the brand, and were puzzled by that. And when they then interviewed the stakeholders of the company, they found, and I rushed through that slide, they were using terms of endearment to describe this company. That, oh, I love this company, I can't imagine my life without it. I've moved to a place where this company exists. So it was really those terms of endearment that defined these firms. And so it was only after these truly loved firms were selected that we looked at their financial performance. So that was the humanistic criteria. I'm sure if you have time for one more.
Dr. Sen, considering that we are at the Global Sourcing Council, could you share with us what is the Conscious Capitalism Institute strategy for globalizing itself?
Okay, we've opened chapters in different parts of the world. We've already had conferences in Asia, in India, in Korea, in Japan, in Australia, in Europe. So that's certainly one way, and we're also doing global outreach of various kinds. I'm sorry, I've gone way over my time.
I just want to volunteer Brazil.
We can, yeah, and Brazil. And
I would
we've
really
been.
like to suggest that you pin Dr. Sen into the corner over dinner. We're really desperately out of time.
Yes, I apologize. I'm the one to blame. So, but I'll be delighted to answer any other questions. Thank you all very much.